A recent trip to the Valley of the Rocks in North Devon, staying in Lynton with my girlfriend, reawakened something old in me. Not just memories, but the feeling of being small in a world that doesn't care about your explanations. Because the first time you stand out there, it's hard to believe the landscape is just a landscape. The valley undulates like a fossilized wave. Granite tors rise from the bones of a post-glacial scar. The sort of shapes you expect on Dartmoor or Bodmin Moor, except here they stand, beside the knife edge of the sea. High cliffs, ocean far below, and wind that never quite sits still. It's a place that feels mythic before you've even learned a single story. The rocks look like petrified giants. The paths feel like old sentences you can still walk along. Even the goats look like they've been stationed there to keep an eye on things. We were staying at the Valley of the Rocks Hotel, an old Victorian building, beautifully made, a little faded now. Not in its prime maybe, but that almost adds to it. It feels like time has been living there, rent-free for a while. That night the wind leaned on the windows. Somewhere a corridor creaked like an old ship, and my girlfriend, warm, curious, started reading about the paranormal reports in the area. I wasn't expecting much. A ghost story, a phantom coach, the usual folklore garnish. And then she said it. A werewolf sighting here in the 1990s. And just like that, the Valley of the Rocks changed shape in my mind. Because suddenly it wasn't only romantic scenery and epic geology. It wasn't only childhood nostalgia and sea-drenched grandeur. Now it had a shadow. People have been drawn to this stretch of Devon for a long time. Writers, wanderers, holidaymakers with pockets full of postcards and heads full of weather, and Lorna Doone, whatever you think of it, helped seal this region into the imagination as a place where landscape and story fuse together. But here's the thing, places like this don't only inspire poetry, they also inspire reports. And when you hear the phrase, werewolf sighting, your modern brain wants to laugh, because it sounds like a costume drama that got lost and ended up in the wrong century. But another part of you leans forward, because if a place already feels mythic, the question becomes dangerously simple. What else has been seen here, and how far back does it go? Devon has a way of holding on to the uncanny, not loudly, not with fireworks, quietly. Sometimes it isn't even a story at first. Sometimes it's just a mark left behind and the human mind arriving after, trying to name it. The Devil's Footprints, 1855. Winter makes the countryside honest. It covers everything, and then it shows you what moved in the night. In February of 1855, after heavy snowfall, people in Devon woke to something they couldn't place. A trail of repeating marks in the snow, neat, consistent prints, appearing in lines across the land, over fields, along lanes, through places where nothing should have walked. It wasn't only the shape of the prints that unsettled them, it was the certainty of them. A single-file track, as if whatever made it had purpose, as if it knew where it was going, as if the night had been busy. The hoof-like track spread 40 to 100 miles from the Esk-estuary, all the way down the coast, passing through Dawlish and Teignmouth, and as far away as Dorset. And then came the human part, the naming. Because when we don't know what something is, we don't leave it blank, we dress it. We give it a face, we wrap a story around it, so the dark doesn't feel empty. They called it the Devil's Footprints. Some tried to explain it away. Animals, mischief, weather tricks, the usual scramble for a world that behaves. But none of the explanations fully soothed the sensation that Devon had briefly become a place where something moved without introducing itself. And that's why the story lasts. Not because it proves the devil, but because it proves something older and more unsettling. That the landscape can show you evidence without granting you understanding. And once a place has a history of unexplained tracks, it becomes easier later for people to believe in shapes without owners. And those unexplained footprints caused mild panic in Victorian Devon, in places where they shouldn't have been, on rooftops, over walls, one continuous track of footprints for miles appearing overnight. And while this is not a werewolf story, it sets the scene for the following tales. The 19th century leaves us plenty of stories like this, not written like reports, but spoken like warnings. This one belongs to Exmoor's story country, the Doone Valley, where the land already feels half made of legend. A woman is said to be walking home after dark, alone on a path that doesn't feel friendly, and she sees a figure. Not an animal in the hedge, not a man in the distance, something that refuses the categories. A grey man with the head of a wolf. It's described as stalking a rabbit, not rushing, not lunging, but moving with a deliberate hunger, the kind of slow attention that raises the hairs on your arms before your mind can form a sentence. Then something crashes through the spell. A stag bursts from nearby cover, sudden and loud, like nature itself is trying to break the scene. And in that moment, the figure vanishes. No footprints you can follow, no explanation, just the old folktale sensation that some things in the countryside borrow shapes, that sometimes the human outline is only a mask and the animal head underneath is the truth. Taken alone, it's testimony. It might be fear, it might be misperception, it might be a story that learned how to walk. But placed aside the footprints in the snow, it becomes part of a pattern. Because Devon and Exmoor don't generate mysteries, they teach the imagination what kind of mystery to expect. Tracks without a clear marker, and a maker without a clear track. And once those ideas exist in a place, they don't die, they wait. There's is a story placed in the late 1950s somewhere in the southwest of England, and it comes to us without a proper map pin, no neat grid reference, no landmark you can point and say, here, just countryside and the suggestion of something wrong moving through it. A man is out hunting hares with his dog, ordinary business, a quiet day stitched together with hedgerows and fields. He climbs a hedge, the way you do without thinking, and on the other side he steps into sudden disorder. A flock of sheep and something among them, not watching, not prowling, attacking. He brings the gun up and fires. He's certain he's hit it. In that moment he expects the world to behave like the world. An animal drops low and runs. A shape disappears on four legs into the seam of the land. But this thing doesn't. It rears up onto its hind legs and it runs upright into the woods. The dog goes after it, straight into the trees. The hunter follows far enough to hear what comes next. Hideous snarling. Not a clean animal noise, but something that makes the tree line feel like a mouth. Then the chase breaks. The dog bursts out again and doesn't stop, straight past its master, as if it's seen something it can't translate, as if instinct has been handed a verdict. The man fires a second shot into the woods, not so much aiming as pleading, and then he runs too, back through the hedges, back through the fields, away from the trees, and back towards the version of the world that makes sense. And then the story does what folk horror stories always do. It grows a second spine. Later, as it's told, the witness studies the occult and decides what he believes he saw. A werewolf. He claims it connects to a local family, a house, a private terror, even that the family once sought help from the church, and the church withdrew, shaken, as if whatever was happening didn't fit the prayers they brought with them. And then comes the detail that clings to the imagination like burrs. That every night they chain the afflicted person up and lock them behind barred doors until morning. Maybe that last layer is truth, maybe it's rumour, maybe it's myth attaching itself to a terrifying moment. But the shape of fear is unmistakable. A predator among sheep, a creature that stood up wrong, and a household trying to survive the night by turning love into restraint. Because in the countryside, the oldest horror isn't always the beast in the woods. Sometimes it's the beast that comes home. And then, in the early 1960s, we find something that isn't a sighting at all, but a belief recorded in conversation, a lingering superstition among moorland folk, that sometimes the animals grazing out on the moor are not what they seem. Not true beasts, but the semblance of one, something wearing an animal's shape. It's old logic, not scientific, not provable, but it matters because it tells us what kind of world people felt they lived in. A world where the countryside isn't just nature, it's a veil. And what you see moving out there at night might be real or might be a mask. This is the mythic soil that stories like werewolves grow in. You don't need a full moon and a curse. You only need the idea that the familiar can turn strange, and that the strange can wear the familiar like a coat. This idea comes from the book The Witchcraft and Folklore of Dartmoor, published in 1965, about the belief of moorland folk that some animals amongst the flock out there at night were actual shapeshifters, not cattle, not sheep, but the semblance of an animal. On Dartmoor, fear isn't always a monster you can point to. Sometimes it's the suspicion that the ordinary has been replaced. Abbotsham is the kind of place that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It sits quietly near Bideford, tucked into lanes and fields with the coast not far off, and a sense sometimes that the countryside is watching you back. The story begins the way a lot of rural horrors begin, not with evidence but with whispers, school talk, the werewolf house out near the woods, A rumour with mud on its boots, and always the same extra detail. Sheep harmed, as if something hungry has been rehearsing nearby. Two boys decide to go looking. It's summer light, the kind that should make you brave, but bravery is a different thing once you step off a road and into a field you're not meant to cross. They climb gates, cut through land. The hedgerows narrow, and the woods ahead don't look like scenery. They look like a border. Inside the trees the air changes, not dramatic, just tighter. A silence that isn't peaceful, more like the place is holding its breath. And neither boy wants to be the first to speak the fear out loud, because once you name it, it becomes real. They push on, they climb barbed wire, they glimpse a house in the woods half hidden, as if it's been placed there to be found only by accident. No movement, no monster, nothing you can point at, but that's the trap. On the way back they lose their route, the wood seems to rearrange itself, paths folding into each other, and then the smell arrives. A stench so severe it becomes a presence. They find a roebuck caught at the fence, dead, swollen, ruined, real, not folklore. And then over it they sense something else. A large, black, predatory presence, crouched, heavy, close. And here's the detail that makes the story rot differently in the mind. When they look straight at it, there's nothing there. But in the corner of the eye, it's obvious, a shape, a mass, a wrongness. Peripheral vision is where fear lives. It's where the body makes decisions before the mouth can form explanations. They run. They run until they reach open air, the cliff path, the sky, the relief of a world that widens again and lets you breathe. They don't come back with proof. They come back with something quieter and harder to shake. The feeling that the wood did not want them there, and that something in it noticed. The case was a story told later by the child grown up as an adult. A huge werewolf-shaped, shadowy figure hovering over a dead animal, as if it was trying to eat it as a spectre that could not be directly seen except through the peripheral vision. Intriguing. The Valley of the Rocks feels like a place designed to hold a secret. Not in a theatrical way, in a geological way. Those granite tors stand like old sentries. The valley is a scar left by ancient ice, and the sea sits below the cliffs like a second, darker sky. The modern report comes in simply. No medieval language, no candlelit flourish. A witness, a man who keeps his identity partial, describes being there on a Sunday in the 1990s. He looks across a field and sees something move. At first, it's just motion, a shape low to the ground. Then the brain tries to translate it. A creature like a man on all fours, covered in black, shaggy hair, running hard across open ground. Close enough to see the wrongness, far enough for the world to keep its doubt intact. And then comes a detail that makes the whole thing feel like a dream. There are sheep in the field, and the sheep do not react. No scatter, no nervous shifting, no sudden chorus of alarm, just grazing, as if nothing predatory has crossed their world at all. The creature makes no sound, it moves quickly and vanishes from view, like a sentence cut off mid-word. Later, the witness realizes another detail, the one that needles you in the ribs if you've ever stood in a strange landscape and feel your certainty thin. The movement seemed wrong, almost as if it were gliding, not fully pressing into the earth the way a running body should. A skeptic can point to distance, light, angle, all honest ingredients of misperception. But the witness isn't describing a big dog, he isn't describing a deer. He's describing a moment where the world behaved incorrectly. And that's the real currency of these stories, not fur, not teeth, but the sensation that reality blinked. Once you hear a report like this, you can never quite walk those paths the same way again. Because the most unsettling thought isn't, what was it? It's this. If it ran through that field, why didn't the sheep care? Footprints in the snow across the hills of Devon, and all along the coast, embedded in the white frost. Footprints in the frost across the span of miles, filling the minds of people with wonder. So now we have the chain, a trail of human moments, each one pinned to the edges of Devon and Exmoor, each one saying in its own way, something moved, something stood up wrong, something wore the familiar like a mask. So what are we actually looking at here? Let's open 3 doors. Door 1. Out here the land is a machine for illusions. Distance flattens shape. Wind disguises sound. The ground rises and falls so a running animal can look like it's floating. Maybe an animal at the wrong angle in low light or fog can resemble a crouched figure. We know that low light and distance can create optical illusions, but I don't think that is the case here. Though expectation matters too. Once you've heard a story, your mind starts scanning for shapes that match it, because you're human. We're built to spot patterns quickly. But who knows? I wasn't there to witness these events, so I cannot judge. Door 2. Stories don't live in the air, they attach to locations. A rumour begins with one voice, then another repeats it. A detail gets added. A lane is named, a wood is chosen, a house becomes that house. And the story, once anchored, behaves like a magnet. People organise experience using the available myth. So you end up with regions that feel like they have resident shadows, not necessarily literal creatures, but presences, silhouettes the community recognises. So a psychological angle perhaps, but I still think that does not explain these cases. Door 3. And then there are details that don't sit still. The Abbotsham report, a presence you can't see head on, but can sense in the corner of your vision. The Valley of the Rocks report, sheep not reacting, silence, the feeling of gliding. Those are splinters, because they describe not only a creature, but a scene behaving wrong, like the environment is participating. Does that mean supernatural? Not automatically. And this is where Devon folklore begins to rhyme with the global myth. The werewolf isn't only a monster, it's an archetype. It's the boundary between human and animal breaking open. It's the fear that the familiar can turn feral. It's the dread of something shaped like us, but governed by different rules. We are afraid of what we might become in the dark, and we are also fascinated by it too. It makes the modern world feel thin, and when human certainty thins, the old shapes slip in, sometimes as stories, sometimes as misreadings, sometimes as something harder to name, sometimes still maybe there is something unknown to an experience. Which brings us to the final part, not the verdict, the return. After all the dates and exhibits, the valley is still there, still immense, still wind-scoured, still indifferent, still beautiful. Me and my girlfriend walk there in a modern world with hotel keys and phones and warm drinks. But the place doesn't belong to our era. It belongs to deep time. It belongs to ice and rock and sea. And maybe that's why it hits so hard. Because some landscapes don't just show you scenery. They show you scale. And scale does something to the mind. It makes you remember you're an animal too, walking upright for now, telling stories so the dark doesn't feel empty. When I think of North Devon, it's the same feeling in a different key. Because returning to a place across your life is a strange kind of haunting. You don't just revisit the location, you revisit who you were when you first learned its shape. Child, teenager, adult. Same lanes, different eyes. Same place, different memories. Grandparents now gone, brothers grown up. And maybe that's the quiet truth behind all these cases, whether they're folklore, testimony, misreadings, or something stranger. Places don't only hold stories, they create them. And once you know a place has a werewolf-shaped rumour attached to it, you can feel it in the air like weather. You can't hold it, you can't photograph it, but you can feel what it does to your attention. So was there a creature? Maybe. In a landscape this old, there are still corners of reality that don't care to be explained. And you can't help but want to see it. But the Valley of the Rocks doesn't offer answers. It offers atmosphere. It offers grandeur. It offers the kind of beauty that makes the mind go quiet. And in that quiet, sometimes you hear a story padding closer. Not on 2 legs, not on 4, but somewhere between. Whatever it was, it left no tracks I can show you, only a tremor in the imagination. only a little shiver in the myth of the coastline. And maybe that's enough.